This is Henry Chamberlain. I'm going to be speaking with Scott Finch. He is the creator of the Domesticated Afterlife. And the Domesticated Afterlife is a 200 plus page graphic novel. And I'm going to let Scott in just a second dive in and describe it. We'll do like a first run describing it. We'll chat about other things. And as the conversation rolls through, you'll know everything that you'd like to know ahead of time of actually reading the book. And also as a bonus, Solrad is going to be serializing this, and I'll let Scott speak to that too. So we'll begin by just the formalities of thank you, Scott, for doing this interview.
Thank you so much, Henry. I'm really looking forward to it. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
I'm going to have a few visual aids, but we'll keep to that a little bit later. And so you're not obligated to directly comment on the slides. It's more like just an added benefit for people. But I wanted to begin by describing the book in a nutshell. For me, and maybe it's not fair for the book, but just as a jumping off point, I would call it like a bit of a mashup of end time fables with satire of consumer culture. Is that a fair, quick assessment?
I think that's a really fair assessment. The story starts out with some characters who are sort of stuck in what feels like the end time, something similar to the kind of working culture that I experienced when I was a bit younger. And then you also see one of these consumers trying to figure out how to be happy through the consumption of what's available in this culture that these characters live in, and how sort of unsatisfactory that is, and what do you do about it? How do you figure that out? Something like that.
Now, let me begin with what can you tell us about how you work in comics, how you structure your narrative?
I started out this book with a kind of an outline, an idea of sort of a beginning and an end, and not a lot of understanding about what the middle would be. I had an idea of characters that sort of represented different perspectives, maybe more maybe more sensorial, more sensory oriented, tactile kind of oriented character. A character is more sort of intellectual, a character just who's more sort of a spiritual character, and then a pragmatist. These different types of characters. I had the idea that, sort of a Wizard of Oz, these characters needed to sort of find each other, figure out how to work together, and figure out a solution to a problem that they found themselves in together.
Now, A Little World Made Cunningly is your first work in comics. What can you tell us about this one?
This is also a sort of a journey through a sort of other world. Both of these are sort of created worlds that, hopefully, as with fantasy or science fiction or any kind of other world, there's some kind of a comment on not only our own world, but maybe an interior journey that the characters are involved in. That story is more a story about creativity and how that can go wrong, how you can get sort of lost in the process of, well, both of these are this story, Henry. I'm sorry. You're making me figure things out I hadn't thought of before. But that, the story of Little World Made Cunningly is starts with a character who is making a world, but he has the idea that maybe he's the biggest thing, maybe he's the only thing in the universe, and he makes this world in his own vision, and it's a mess. And so maybe that is a lot like the other book too. Maybe I only have one thing to say. So yeah, that's what that book is about. I think I lost the thread there somewhere.
Well, I think this is a good time to point out to folks your background is drawing and painting. You have an MFA in painting, and then
Yeah.
you made the transition over to comics. Is there something you could tell us about what brought you to comics after having been a painter for such a long period of time?
Okay, so I was always making figurative paintings. I was always making paintings that had a sort of implied narrative or suggested themes beyond beyond that the static image. So a reading of one of my paintings, I would hopefully to me suggest a wider world and an activity before and after maybe. And I always thought of the paintings as best understood in the context of a body of work or an exhibit of work rather than a solitary painting. So I liked for somebody to experience my work in groups, in exhibits of maybe 10 or more images, and thinking the relationships between those images sort of created some kind of movement or momentum. And then, but still, it took me until I was pushing 40 to have the idea that, well, you could make a sequence, you could make sequential images and have them relate to each other in time. It just didn't occur to me. I don't think I've ever been a really smart or sort of rational planner with art. I'm always sort of led by imagery and ideas that force themselves on me, and then I get dragged sort of backwards and confused into what I'm going to do next. So yeah, it was just one day I was taking a long walk, and all this Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, early Christian Gnostic myth, and Greek stuff, all the world of like the Hellenistic stuff, the soup that I've been reading for a dozen years or more, sort of shaped themselves into that first book, A Little World Made Cunningly. And I said, oh yeah, that story is here. I've read it 100 times in different cultures and different ways told, but seems to be my way to say it. I say mine, not that it was my idea. It was just sort of there. And I thought, well, I better write this down before I forget it. Like waking up from a dream and you've got to write it down before you forget it. And then I just drew it as fast as I could before I forgot it. And I found that in drawing it, all the parts were there, but when I went to work on them, I would think, well, I just have this one idea here. But then I sit down and think, well, no, that bullet of the outline actually has 10 other things under it, and those are all there too somehow. I don't know how to say that, but just because it came to me as sort of imagery, as visual, it was just there. That's all I can say is I'm not smart, but there seems to be a sort of unconscious thing that's chugging away in the background and pushing its way out into my sketchbooks and into the work. And eventually I bumped into that, to that story. And then once I had the idea, I was like, well, why wasn't I doing this before? This makes so much sense. These things should follow one after another. So that's how I got from painting to making stories.
Well, comics are in everyone's lives. It's just such a big thing that it's in the background in everyone's lives. We spoke earlier, and you had mentioned the fact that one of your instructors was Susan Moore, wife of Charles Burns, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, Susan was my teacher when I was at Tyler School of Art, and she was great. She was a great teacher, and I knew that she was married to Charles Burns. I knew who he was. I mean, I'm squarely in the Generation X, area. That this was not a minor figure in the pantheon at that time. But I was so far away from thinking about making that kind of thing. That I was just thinking about making paintings and thinking this is where you delve into into art. I just had a small idea of what that meant, yeah, I couldn't see beyond that. So yeah, I missed that opportunity really all the way around. But Susan was a tremendous teacher. I had very good teachers at Tyler all around.
Now, A Little Roommate Kindly came out in 2013, and you followed up with Form Indeed, which is, I think of it a little bit as a combination of the world of painting and comics, because all of these, they look like little paintings. And I think it gives a window into your process because they're about being in a meditative state and what results. Could you say a little bit about this little guy, Form Indeed?
Sure. Yeah. So somewhere along the way, I realized that if I wanted to sort of untangle the sore muscles and stress in my body and the worry in my head, that I need to sit down every once in a while and be quiet. That once I had that idea to do that, I made a practice of it. And but what I find is before I could get to any kind of quiet or stillness, when I closed my eyes, generally there was just a lot of imagery there. Some of it would just be worries and thinking about the day and stuff like that. And then as that would settle down a little bit, it wouldn't be replaced by quiet. It would be replaced by sort of hypnagogic or dream images or symbolic images, which I never really mostly ever understood at all. Or they would be just sort of really specific images of being in a place, someplace I don't know, or things like that. And one of those days was a series of images like this that are in that book. And for whatever reason, I did, after, at some point in that, I did get to kind of a quiet place where I felt, oh, okay, everything loosened up. My body is, well, right now I'm pretty tense. My shoulders are wrapped like this, but I did feel like at some point, like, oh, okay, I'm okay. And when I came out of it, I thought I just did my best to record that and to tell that little story about sitting down, passing through the sort of visionary reverie, and then settling down, which is a smaller story, and it's a smaller book, but was something that I thought I would really like to see if I can draw some of this. So that's what that is.
Now, the next book I want to chat about is Cheer Charm Life, which seems like out of left field, but it's part of a bigger picture about your body of work, your lifetime of work. And it's just such a treat to get my hands on this one. I can't seem to, there we go.
Yeah.
These are stickers, and the really fun thing about this book is it's very interactive. It invites the reader to actively participate, as you mentioned to me, because you can take these figures. You can take these figures out and then paste them on and create your own art.
Right. Yeah. So those were all collages that I made on self-adhesive paper, like label paper, and just drawings in marker, mostly Sharpie color, basic Sharpie colors, which I've been making them and sticking them on things. Just like I have a friend who has sort of an artist community, and I went to an event there one time, and I just started sticking them on the calendar in the kitchen or on the bag of coffee by the little coffee station, and then I said, oh, look at this. When you put these colors next to these commercially designed packaging and things, they pop a certain way, and they seem like they fit. They immediately, upon pressing them onto those kind of surfaces, they feel like they come from there and they belong there. And so I tried them on a lot of different things, and then I found that really cereal boxes were the thing that really employed that sort of bright color, poppy design, meant to be read and scanned and looked at and turned around and interacted with playfully, especially children's cereal boxes. And those things just seem to go together so well. And that I made a whole series of work about that. people kept bringing me cereal boxes. Once people figured I was doing this, I would come home from work or something. There would be just a stack of trash on my front stoop, which was my materials to make some work. And I really loved doing that. The fun thing about that was that it's just this sort of inexhaustible, perpetual drawing machine. If you just set me down with markers and materials like that, that kind of drawing is just sort of automatic. I think everybody has things that they doodle or just creatively play with color and line, and that's all that those were. And then the composition of them was about cutting them out, arranging them, and in relation to the cereal box as sort of the field of play. And it was just a fun thing to do. And then the idea when we were making a book that, well, those stickers could be unstuck and then somebody else could play with them, just seemed like such a fun thing to do. So that's how that ended up happening. The other thing is Antenna, the folks who printed that, I owed them the Domesticated Afterlife. And I said, look, I'm never going to finish this thing. I know you've offered me this opportunity to do a run of this, but I just know it's going to take me forever. So why don't we do, I have this other idea. Let's do that instead. I gave them that. And the director there was very kind and said, this is a great idea. And we want the book too. And I said, oh gosh, okay, well, I better hurry and figure out how to finish the book, which, immediately thereafter we had the pandemic and I was home. I was still working, but not driving, it changed the way that I interacted with it and gave me enough rest and time to really bear down on it in 2020 and get it completed. So, so that's the little story of that.
I'm going to show some of the stuff going on in Sheer Charm Life just for fun. And a lot of thoughts I get in my mind about this. I think about how a lot of people think art is either elitist or mysterious, or that they just can't get their handle on it. But a lot of it is just go in there and have fun. And every industry, everything that people do has a certain jargon to it. Process is one of the words in the art world. And there's nothing hoity-toity about it. It just means creating work. You learn a lot in the process of making stuff.
Henry, I'm going to tell you one other little thing that pops in my head as you're saying that about process, and that it doesn't have to be precious and this high art elitist thing. When I started making this body of work, I also started a job where I work in the field of public art. I help the state of Louisiana to place public art around the state. And when I started to think about big, permanent public art all day long in my work, that was the time when I thought, when I go home, I want to make something disposable, something light, something the complete opposite of that. The idea that my personal and private work just had this completely opposite character to what I spent my day thinking about, which you just popped in my head when you said that. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to go through some images from your other work. This is from A World Cunningly. And I think that this demonstrates your working method. You say you seem to have one particular thing you're working on. Well, it's a lifetime's work there. Just that talking about, one thing a lot of artists will say to just cut it short so people can get a handle. My work's about the human condition. That's a very shorthand way of putting things. But and are some samples from the Domesticated Afterlife.
Right, there's everything you need.
Yeah,
all in one store. This is a meeting of all the characters, sort of in an other realm, a visionary dream that sort of perplexes. It's told from one character to another. He wakes up from his dream and tells his character to basically his superior, who actually understands what's happening in the dream, while the character himself is entirely unimpressed with it. He's just, this is some nonsense my head made up. where can I get something to eat? And so, yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you to maybe share with us a little more about the influences for your book, The Domesticated Afterlife. Are there any philosophical works, or is it mostly just a bunch of things that's hard to pinpoint? Or
Yeah, no, I mean, sure. There's, like I said, for one is the work of Carl Jung, who I just sort of gobbled up when I was, I don't know what, maybe 19 or 20. I started reading. I read, to say I read the entire collected works is maybe not accurate, but it feels like it's fairly close to accurate. Some of it very obscure and heavy to read. But what he does is he takes you through the history of Western culture with an emphasis on images and the meaning of symbols and images, and he refers you to the alchemists and the kinds of pictures that they made and the kinds of stories that they made, sort of completely not having a handle on what they're just going into the irrational and bringing things back, like the underworld journeys of the Greeks, or the Popol Vuh in South America. They're just certain stories that are about this this journey into the underworld or into the other realm, and can you bring anything back from there? And if you do, can you understand what you have in your hand? You know, if you manage to get it back. A lot of those kind of stories. I also I love pictures of cosmologies through the ages. Their images of you know, Dante's cosmology, or there's beautiful pictures of esotericist Robert Flood. You know, all those kind of things. And then there are certainly comics artists that I've been really influenced by, although I sort of started making a little world first and then started acquiring or finding little hints of people who think about myth and spirituality and fables and things like that you mentioned earlier. So I'm looking at my list behind me here to try to remember. So, you know, I mentioned to you once before, Alan Moore, Promethea just kind of blew me away. Although the drawing style for me felt so much like superhero comics, that was hard to get past because I hadn't really been versed in that kind of work. Same thing with The Invisibles, Grant Morrison. Those stories, the idea that you could have sort of esoteric ideas or magical ideas, things like that, enter into sequential work in a way that, and enter into it with narrative in a way that sort of placed it, grounded it in a framework that people could interact with, that it doesn't become so ephemeral and so heady, and that it's just airy-fairy and gets away from the reader. Daria Tesler made a great book a couple of years ago, The Cult of the Ibis, and then another one, The Loop of the Sun, which I think are just incredible things. And then when I was making my Little World Made Cunningly, Jesse Moynihan, right when I finished it, I started seeing all this news online about a great new supposedly Gnostic comic by Jesse Moynihan, which is called Forming, which is an online thing that he continues to add to this day. And I started to read that, and I was just blown away by how you know, just how deep and widely knowledgeable he is about some of the same kinds of things that really interest me. But he is, you know, so incredibly talented. That work just blew me away. There's lots of people. I'm reading a few off of the list here, but just for starters, some of the things that interest me.
Yeah, well, people tuning into this interview will appreciate that. I wanted to chat a little bit about the whole idea of esoteric quality to a work, or ambiguity. You hear that over and over again in painting, especially for art students, that you want to keep some mystery or keep it ambiguous. And that's really quite a wonderful quality to find in comics. And some people, they try to force that in. You seem to do it naturally, maybe because of your painting background or just your demeanors. But I think that's one of the things that it draws a lot of people. A certain type of person And I think once this book catches on, more people are going to jump on the bandwagon, especially having it serialized. That's amazing. It's a very trippy book and a lot of unfamiliar territory. So it might, people wonder, well, what is the thing that might be tripping people up is because it is unfamiliar territory. So you're trying to get a hook into it. And one thing that I kind of caught on was that and I don't know if you did this deliberately, but what you would call the protagonist, the main character, is that this wolf who gets lured in to the afterlife. His name is never mentioned right away. It's like midway into the book, and it's a very arcane name. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Enade.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, which
then,
is just a Welsh word for soul. There's so many. I don't know why I made these choices, but yeah, that's the name. And it was, names are held back a lot, and I do that in life too. I feel like saying the name of someone, saying someone's name is like, that's intimacy in a way. It's like, that's, you want to understand somebody, but you want to feel that is instantly brings you closer to them. And I wasn't sure when I was comfortable doing that with some of those characters. So people who read it early on told me, you have to give the characters their names. Just have somebody say hi, and then say their name right at the beginning, so you can establish a relationship. I don't know what my problem is, but I was really resistant to it. So yeah, intentional, but maybe not well advised. Just, in fact, I was advised against it. So anyway.
Well, that might be something that fans will love. Oh, look, he's doing it again. Or, gee, I wonder what the name of the main character is. Maybe we'll find out by the next chapter. But it's an interesting way to challenge the reader, I guess, or to make the reader focus in more. Is that fair to say? Or
maybe so. And the other thing is, I think also in the first chunk of the book, maybe I'm not. It also, there are times when I feel like I'm not drawing the character the same way I'm learning how to draw it, and I haven't named it. And I wonder. So I went back and redrew some of it to make sure, if I'm not going to name him, he should at least look the same from frame to frame. So. But I was really figuring it out as I was going at the start. And this one was not like A Little World May Cunningly, where I had a real sense of the whole map of it. I was doing little bits of it, and then I would get to a dead end and wait 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, a year sometimes in between chunks of it, because I really didn't know exactly where I was going. But I had a certain confidence that it was going somewhere, but I get lost quite a lot with it. So it took me a long time to write.
Well, it's not that what would be the word, dense, where people are going to be, oh, I can't understand this, because there are straightforward narratives running throughout the book. Enade and Sai, or is it C? Sai?
Yes, C. I think
C. Okay, I love that. Well, they pair up, and it's kind of these guys against the world, trying to figure out, and a lot of it's just trying to figure out reality. What the hell's reality? And the times we're living in now, they kind of like, they just tear the fabric away, the veil. So what you talk about it in your book, like the chickens are supposed to be at the top of the hierarchy, but they're really not, because they're slaves to consumer culture, and they're very as much a victim of the twisted world that they live in. They think they're on top. They're supposed to be like the 1%ers, but they're always looking for the next big shiny bauble to go for. And the cats are the middlemen, and they don't have any respect. And then the dogs, they're the slaves. And in a way, they have some freedom, but not really, because they're wage slaves.
Right. Yep. Yeah, sound familiar?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and the dogs, they don't even have a home in this place. They live on a broken down ship, just sort of at the edge of things. And yeah, they never get a footing in this society throughout, and so and that ship, the book starts and ends with that ship. So yeah, yeah, very much so.
Now let me get back on script a little bit. It's
Okay.
fun to go completely off script, but I wanted to ask you a few more questions. What have you learned about the comics medium, compared, contrasted to painting? What else would you like to share about that?
What have I learned? I mean, I think what I learned, what I feel like I'm learning along the way is to take my time and really tell stories visually. To tell whatever I want to say, I want it to be first and foremost visual. I felt like when I made that first book that I was so busy sort of pushing a narrative along that I didn't slow down and describe, well, what's going on here? How does this? What's the lay of the land? What's the imagery that's important? And can I stop and describe it? Can there be pauses? Can there be just moments for a reader to get their feet under them and understand what's going on? If I'm going to be so complicated in what I'm talking about, maybe I should give people, some cliff notes once in a while, some visual cues, and if there are things that I'm referring to or things that are important to me that are sort of behind things or under the hood, every once in a while, let's really stop and investigate them. That's something that I tried to do with this book a little bit more. So there are a lot of full page drawings that are meant as a way of sort of stopping and oftentimes through references to other visual imagery like the history of art or things like that, to just give context and a little bit of clarity for the reader. It might be something I'm learning right now. I feel really I'm in the middle of figuring out what I'm doing next, and so I feel a little unmoored and not at all certain about what I know. I feel like I'm forgetting more than I'm holding on to, but we'll see what happens next.
It's a tough question. You did very well answering that. I have the same issues going on with me. I mean, if you can see in the back, I've got a painting way in the back here that I'm starting.
Yeah.
And I've got drawings back here, and I love the world of painting and I love the world of comics. And while I was in college studying fine art painting and creative writing, I was also doing a comic strip. And so I couldn't let go of these worlds. And it's very hard to combine them, really.
Mm-hmm.
And can you? I mean, paintings are paintings and comics are comics, and you can put comic elements into paintings. But I think at the end of the day, they are separate worlds. And it's something people love to chat about. I love chatting about it.
Yeah.
What?
So tell me about the painting. I want to know about the paintings going on back there. What's happening?
Oh, I should show you some others. That one is just, well, you know it. It's just beginning. It's going to be I'm playing with shapes. So I've got a lot of paintings where I'm playing with arcs, and then I've got these ambiguous characters, things that I found very intriguing in museums or on the net, and they'll end up being featured, or something will be in shadow. Or Crazy Cat's on my radar. I just love Crazy Cat, and so I'll have like Crazy Cat and a clock, and there'd be an arch, and then I'll play with shading and at some point I think it's done. And I picked up so many little tips and tricks over the years. One tip, simultaneously while I was doing art in a formal educational setting in a university, I was also taking classes from a guy who learned it, a self-taught guy. And I learned so much from the self-taught guy. Sometimes I think I learned more from him. And one of his biggest bits of advice was always pause, take a long pause, put that painting on an easel, go to sleep, come back and look at it, and then let it a few more days go by, a week, however, keep looking at it. You'll see things that you might want to add. You won't see them right away. All of these little bits and pieces. If you love art, you'll pick up all these little tips and tricks, your
Well,
own tips and tricks.
when I started teaching, that was one of the first things. I mean, it was a major thing that I tried to teach early drawing students is step back. They would bear down on their drawings until their faces were here. And I'm thinking, you can't see that. You can't. There's no way, because they're so interested in the part that they're working on that it loses proportion. The placement gets distorted. Everything gets distorted because you don't see the whole anymore. And also you're so tightly focused on that one thing. It's the relationships between all those parts, and you can't understand lights and darks if you're that. All those things. Every once in a while, you really have to step back and rest. That's really good advice. That's a wise teacher. And it's something that I only figured out by watching students and feeling the pain for them, like, oh my goodness, what's going on here, and probably something I needed to learn too still at that time. So yeah, that's a good point.
That painter, his name pops into my memory, just talking to you jogged my memory, Steve Parker, and he was active in Houston, Texas. I don't know if he might have migrated over to Louisiana, or because once you're in one particular region or area, that becomes your baby, or your. Well, there's so much to be said about where you live, informing your art, and just saying the word informing can throw people off. Oh, that sounds hoity-toity. No, it's not. It's just a word. It's just a tool. But I wanted to ask you just a couple more questions. What do you hope people will take away from a domesticated afterlife?
I really hope that they just enjoy it. I heard a friend of mine the other day was looking at it, and he said, I've read about a quarter of it, and it's really dark. And I thought, well, yeah, I said, well, that's the setup. You don't want to start at the happy, but I think that there is an expectation that maybe this a medium sometimes, especially people who aren't as familiar with it, where you don't expect it to be things to be as dark, but the idea of that they would go on that journey with me. I want them to just enjoy and experience that journey that the characters go through. And although maybe it's ambiguous, the ending is ambiguous. To me, it's something about art and creativity, and placing an emphasis on people and relationships, and working together creatively as a solution. I think that's what's happening there, and I hope that comes through. Although, like you say, it's ambiguous, but to me, that's sort of it's a theme that sort of runs through the work. So hopefully they see that.
Well, I would just say that it's like any other form of entertainment, or a serious novel. From The Great Gatsby to Game of Thrones. Once you start in a novel, some novels it takes a while to get into it, and then once you're in, you don't want it to ever end. So the same applies to the Domesticated Afterlife.
That's so nice. Thank you.
And now, okay, I want to make sure I get this last question in correctly. Where do you see your art going? Will you always work in various media, or do you see yourself going into comics and nothing else, or what can you tell us?
I have no idea.
Good.
Like I say, I didn't ever have any idea that I would do this until I did it. And every time I put together a new exhibition of paintings or drawings or collages or whatever at my gallery, our director will invite us to do a talk, and he says, okay, this is a complete departure from what you showed the last time. Can you explain how you got from there to here? And for me, it's just what is suggested by the work to come next, I don't feel really like I'm committed to any particular medium or way of making things, but I really do want to make another book, and I have some ideas for that. So that should be the next thing. And if it's anything like this one, it'll take a really long time. So maybe nobody will see anything from me for a really long time, because I seem to work slowly, and and I like to kind of toil off in my corner by myself. So, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I want to make another book. That's what I want to do next.
Well, very good. And I think having it come out online might be the solution, because then you don't feel
Yeah,
so isolated in a way.
I'm hoping that. I'm really excited that Soul Rat is going to serialize the book. I do want people to see it. I'd like to get feedback. Having a little like the feedback that you gave me through your review, it meant the world to me, because I really did make this in a community where I don't really know other people who are working in this medium. I didn't really get a lot of feedback over the years as I was working on it. And so this really has been a gratifying time to put it out into the world and get feedback and find out some of the things that I had hoped would read and that people might take away from it are actually getting across. That I had no certainty about any of that at all. So that's been really nice. I really am hoping that it finds an audience, finds some people who enjoy it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.